Hey, what's up friends? Grant Baldwin here. Welcome back to the Speaker Lab Speech Breakdowns, where today we're going to be doing a TED Talk that's brand new that just came out recently from Matt Walker, where he's going to be talking about the importance and the power of sleep. Now, there's a couple things that Matt does really, really well. He uses slides very effectively. He uses pauses really effectively. So he uses it several different places that we can learn from, that we can pay attention to. We'll talk about what makes it work. Also going to be talking about different ways that you could use props and different things that he could do to incorporate that. We also talk about how he could improve the talk when you're talking about something that is swimming in the deep end. You got a kind of a heavy, kind of confusing type of academic type of talk. How do you keep an audience engaged? We talk about a couple of different ideas for that. All right, let's get right into it. Here's this TED Talk from Matt Walker. Enjoy.
Thank you very much. Well, I would like to start with testicles. Men who sleep 5 hours a night have significantly smaller testicles than those who sleep 7 hours or more. In addition...
I don't know what to say, but that's interesting. Okay, all right, that's a good way to immediately throw out a line like that. Now that's a very risky line, because that's the type of line that you can throw out there and it got a good reaction because of the way he delivered it. He delivered it slow, he paused a long time, he let it sit there, and it got kind of the laughter that he was looking for. It's also the kind of thing that immediately creates some potential awkwardness. A lot of this depends on the audience and it depends on you as the speaker. Now my guess is that the audience didn't have a lot of familiarity with him. If this was a comedian coming out and giving that opening line, they would have got an even bigger reaction, because that's what would be expected, would be for a comedian to deliver a funny line like that. In this case, probably not expected, catches the audience a little bit off guard, but they still laugh because of how he delivered it.
Men who routinely sleep just 4 to 5 hours a night will have a level of testosterone which is that of someone 10 years their senior. So a lack of sleep will age a man by a decade in terms of that critical aspect of wellness. And
good pauses, really good pauses. You see how he delivers a line and then he pauses. Pauses a long time, and that's what's oftentimes called a pregnant pause, to the point where it almost feels uncomfortable. It feels like it's forever, but it really gives the audience a chance to let it digest, to let it sink in, to let them grasp what it is that he just said, versus just saying a bunch of things, moving on very quickly, and they're still trying to process what he said a few minutes ago or a few seconds ago while still trying to listen to what he's talking about now. So delivering something slowly, pausing for effect, letting it sit there, letting it marinate with the audience, and then continuing. So that was a really good job.
You see equivalent impairments in female reproductive health caused by a lack of sleep. This is the best news that I have for you today.
What did he say?
This is the best news that I have for you today.
Good.
From this point, it may only get worse. Not only will I tell you about the wonderfully good things that happen when you get sleep, but the alarmingly bad things that happen when you don't get enough, both for your brain and for your body. Let me start with the brain and the functions of learning and memory. Because what we've discovered over the past 10 or so years is that...
Now he started the talk by giving some big stats that affect all human beings, right? This affect the men's side, affect the female side. He's given those as kind of like, hey, this is why sleep matters. And now he's going to start to go into it a little bit deeper. But he's given this initial hook that pulls the audience in, because now we want to know, how else does sleep affect us? Or what else do I need to be paying attention to as it relates to my sleep? Or what are the other ways that sleep or lack of affects my life? And so he's done a good job of setting this up in the beginning so that it hooks people in and they pay attention and they want to know where he's going with this talk as it relates to sleep.
You need sleep after learning to essentially hit the save button on those new memories so that you don't forget. But recently we discovered that you also need sleep before learning. And now to actually prepare your brain, almost like a dry sponge, ready to initially soak up new information.
Now, this would be an interesting opportunity for an actual physical demonstration of that. So whenever it comes to using props, there's certainly pros and cons to using props, but this would be a good instance where that could work. I like to find the props that you can use that are very simple, it's easy to understand, and it doesn't take a lot for you as a speaker to be able to implement. So if he had a dry sponge that he was holding, and then he dipped it in water and wrung it out or whatever, just to like best make the point that he's trying to make, that would be a really effective visual way to make this type of illustration using a prop, right? So that would be one thing. The other thing that he could do with that is, let's say he obviously would need like a bucket of water and a dry sponge. He could have those things sitting on a side table that when an audience sees that immediately creates intrigue of what is it that he's going to do with those objects. How are they going to come into the play, into the presentation? How are they going to come into play? And so it immediately opens a loop in the mind of the audience is they want to know what's he going to do with the sponge and the bucket. So that's just an idea of something that you could use a prop for. So look for those little visual opportunities where you can incorporate something like that into your talk.
Without sleep, the memory circuits of the brain essentially become waterlogged, as it were, and you can't absorb new memories. So let me show you the data. Here in this study, we decided to test the hypothesis that pulling the all-nighter was a good idea. So we took a group of individuals and we assigned them to one of two experimental groups, a sleep group and a sleep deprivation group. Now, the sleep group, they're going to get a full 8 hours of slumber. But the deprivation group, we're going to keep them awake in the laboratory under full supervision. There's no naps or caffeine, by the way, so it's miserable for everyone involved. And then the next day, we're going to place those participants inside an MRI scanner. And we're going to have them try and learn a whole list of new facts as we're taking snapshots of brain activity. And then we're going to test them to see how effective that learning has been. And that's what you're looking at here on the vertical axis. And when you put those two groups head to head, what you find is a quite...
He did a really good job explaining the experiment. The experiment's simple, right? But it's easy to take some type of experiment like that and make it very complicated and difficult for an audience to understand or to grasp. So he did a good job of explaining that in a very, very simple way for an audience to be able to understand and grasp.
Significant 40% deficit in the ability of the brain to make new memories without sleep. I think this should be concerning considering what we know is happening to sleep in our education populations right now. In fact, to put that in context, it would be the difference in a child acing an exam versus failing it miserably, 40%. And we've gone on to discover what goes wrong within your brain to produce these types of learning disabilities. And there's a structure that sits on the left and the right side of your brain called the hippocampus. And you can think of the hippocampus almost like the informational inbox of your brain. It's very good at receiving new memory files and then holding on to them. And when you look at this structure in those people who'd had a full night of sleep, we saw lots of healthy learning-related activity. Yet in those people who were sleep deprived, we actually couldn't find any significant signal whatsoever. So it's almost as though...
This is also an important note of where slides can be very, very effective and visuals within slides, because he could describe all that verbally and we're kind of like, yeah, I kind of get it, I kind of understand it, but when he shows it in terms of the graph where the hippocampus is within the brain, and then you can see the green and the red there on the graph, it makes a lot more sense of like, oh dang, wow, like sleep really does have a powerful, powerful effect in the way that he just described it. So having visuals can be very effective. Now, we've also talked about in other videos where it cannot be effective and it can be actually a hindrance to you. If technology doesn't cooperate or something doesn't work, then it can really, really negatively impact you. But this again is a good example of where slides can really, really benefit and help you as a speaker.
Sleep deprivation had shut down your memory inbox, and any new incoming files, they were just being bounced. You couldn't effectively commit new experiences to memory. So that's the bad that can happen if I were to take sleep away from you. But let me just come back to that control group for a second. Do you remember those folks that got a full 8 hours of sleep?
Now, whenever he said, let's come back to that control group for a second, one thing that you can do there is he's talking about it and using slides to represent it and demonstrate it, but another thing that he could do is the way that you move around the stage, the actual physical space of the stage could represent where different areas where you may be talking about other parts of, or other groups. So for example, if he were on one side of the stage when he was talking about the control group, and then he moved over to talk about the experimental group, and then whenever he's going, let's go back and talk about the control group for a second. So he physically goes back over there because the audience in their mind has placed where he was when he was talking about different parts of this experiment. So that's something that you could do. If you're telling a story that works linearly, meaning that you are telling a past, present, and future, you could potentially move across the stage as you're telling that story to represent almost like a timeline. So think about the physical space of the stage or where it is within the room as you're speaking to an audience, that you could use that space to best represent what it is that you're talking about, what you're telling.
Well, we can ask a very different question. What is it about the physiological quality of your sleep when you do get it that restores and enhances your memory and learning ability each and every day? And by placing electrodes all over the head, what we've discovered is that there are big, powerful brain waves that happen during the very deepest stages of sleep that have riding on top of them these spectacular bursts of electrical activity that we call sleep spindles. And it's the combined quality of these deep sleep brainwaves that acts like a file transfer mechanism at night, shifting memories from a short-term vulnerable reservoir to a more permanent long-term storage site within the brain, and therefore protecting them, making them safe. And it is important that we understand what, during sleep, actually transacts these memory benefits, because there are real medical and societal implications. And let me just tell you about one area that we've moved this work out into clinically, which is the context of aging and dementia. Because it's, of course, no secret that as we get older, our learning and memory abilities begin to fade and decline. But what we've also discovered is that a physiological signature of aging is that your sleep gets worse, especially that deep quality of sleep that I was just discussing. And only last year, we finally published evidence that these two things, they're not simply co-occurring, they are significantly interrelated. And it suggests that the disruption of deep sleep is an underappreciated factor that is contributing to cognitive decline or memory decline in aging, and most recently we've discovered in Alzheimer's disease as well. Now, I know this is remarkably depressing news. It's in the mail, it's coming at you, but there's a potential silver lining here. Unlike many of the other factors that we know are associated with aging, for example, changes in the physical structure of the brain, that's fiendishly difficult to treat. But that sleep is a missing piece in the explanatory puzzle of aging and Alzheimer's is exciting because we may be able to do something about it. And one way that we are approaching this at my sleep center is not by using sleeping pills, by the way. Unfortunately, they are blunt instruments that do not produce naturalistic sleep. Instead, we're actually developing a method based on this. It's called direct current brain stimulation. You insert a small...
Okay, so one thing that you want to be aware of as a speaker is when you're talking about something that's kind of a swim in the deep end, it's very, very easy to start to lose the audience, or for the audience to start to check out. And they start either looking at their phone, or they're not really paying attention, or they're kind of glazed over. You can't quite tell if they're with you or not. So when you're doing that, one of the things as a speaker is if you're giving this same type of presentation, if he's giving this presentation on a regular basis, is you have to be able to read the audience to figure out when they're with you and when they're not. And when they're not that with you, you got to figure out what you need to change within the talk to mix it up. So it could be something as simple as an interaction. How many of you have experienced this before? Let me see your hand. Or turn to your neighbor and say this, or some type of call and response type of thing. A raising of the hand would be a really simple thing for him to do in this type of talk. Another thing he could do is he could interject a story, right? So a story is something that immediately hooks an audience in and it gets their attention back in to whatever it is that he is talking about. So that's another thing that he could do. But as a speaker, just be aware that when you're giving a presentation, notice when you start to lose the audience a little bit. Not because you're a bad speaker, but maybe just because it's a little bit of a swim in the deep end. And so how do you break that up for the audience, or how do you pattern interrupt to bring them back in and re-engage them with what it is that you're talking about?
Small amount of voltage into the brain, so small you typically don't feel it, but it has a measurable impact. Now, if you apply this stimulation during sleep in young, healthy adults, as if you're sort of singing in time with those deep sleep brainwaves, not only can you amplify the size of those deep sleep brainwaves, but in doing so, we can almost double the amount of memory benefit that you get from sleep. The question now is whether we can translate this same affordable, potentially portable piece of technology into older adults and those with dementia. Can we restore back some healthy quality of deep sleep? And in doing so, can we salvage aspects of their learning and memory function? That is my real hope now. That's one of our moonshot goals, as it were. So that's an example of sleep for your brain, but sleep is just as essential for your body. We've already spoken about sleep loss and your reproductive system. Or I could tell you about sleep loss and your cardiovascular system, and that all it takes is 1 hour. Because there is a global experiment performed on 1.6 billion people across 70 countries twice a year. And it's called daylight savings time. Now, in the spring, when we lose 1 hour of sleep, we see a subsequent 24% increase in heart attacks that following day.
Wow. Okay, so again, notice what he just did there. He delivered a big, powerful line there, right? And he wanted to emphasize that. So what did he do? He paused. He let that sink in. Like, give the audience a chance to process that. The day after daylight savings time changes, that you lose an hour, that the heart attacks increase by 24%, right? I don't know that I could have spouted that back had he brushed through that much quicker and just kept moving on. But going through it slow and then pausing to let that sink in is really, really effective.
In the autumn, when we gain an hour of sleep, we see a 21% reduction in heart attacks. Isn't that incredible?
Another pause.
And you see exactly the same profile for car crashes, road traffic accidents, even suicide rates. But as a deeper dive, I want to focus on this: sleep loss and your immune system. And here I'll introduce these delightful blue elements in the image. They are called natural killer cells. And you can think of natural killer cells almost like the Secret Service agents of your immune system. They are very good at identifying dangerous, unwanted elements and eliminating them. In fact, what they're doing here is destroying a cancerous tumor mass. So what you wish for is a virile set of these immune assassins at all times. And tragically, that's what you don't have if you're not sleeping enough. So here in this experiment, you're not going to have your sleep deprived for an entire night. You're simply going to have your sleep restricted to 4 hours for one single night. And then we're going to look to see what's the % reduction in immune cell activity that you suffer. And it's not small. It's not 10%. It's not 20%. There was a 70% drop in natural killer cell activity. That's a concerning state of immune deficiency. And you can perhaps understand why we're now finding significant links between short sleep duration and your risk for the development of numerous forms of cancer. Currently, that list includes cancer of the bowel, cancer of the prostate, and cancer of the breast. In fact, the link between a lack of sleep and cancer is now so strong that the World Health Organization has classified any form of nighttime shift work as a probable carcinogen because of a disruption of your sleep-wake rhythms. So you may have heard of that old maxim that you can sleep when you're dead. Well, I'm being quite serious now. It is mortally unwise advice. We know this from epidemiological studies across millions of individuals. There's a simple truth. The shorter your sleep, the shorter your life. Short sleep predicts all-cause mortality. And if increasing your risk for the development of cancer or even Alzheimer's disease were not sufficiently disquieting, we have since discovered that a lack of sleep will even erode the very fabric of biological life itself, your DNA genetic code. So here in this study, they took a group of healthy adults and they limited them to 6 hours of sleep a night for 1 week. And then they measured the change in their gene activity profile relative to when those same individuals were getting a full 8 hours of sleep a night. And there were two critical findings. First, a sizable and significant 711 genes were distorted in their activity, caused by a lack of sleep. The second result was that about half of those genes were actually increased in their activity, the other half were decreased. Now, those genes that were switched off by a lack of sleep were genes associated with your immune system. So once again, you can see that immune deficiency. In contrast, those genes that were actually upregulated or increased by way of a lack of sleep were genes associated with the promotion of tumors, genes associated with long-term chronic inflammation within the body, and genes associated with stress and, as a consequence, cardiovascular disease. There is simply no aspect of your wellness that can retreat at the sign of sleep deprivation and get away unscathed. It's rather like a broken water pipe in your home. Sleep loss will leak down into every nook and cranny of your physiology.
So that's a good analogy there. So anytime you are speaking about some type of complex subject or topic that may not totally make sense for the audience, one thing that you can do is use some type of analogy of connecting what is known with something that is unknown. So the way he was describing all this, the disease side of things, it's kind of a little bit confusing. It can be, again, a little bit of swim in the deep end. But whenever he's saying, it's kind of like if you had a leak in your house, a water leak, it's going to trickle through and it's going to affect every single part of it. Well, all of us immediately understand that, we get that. And so now we can connect the dots between something that is known versus something that is unknown in terms of what it is that he's talking about. So look for analogies to take what is known and connect it to the unknown.
Even tampering with the very DNA nucleic alphabet that spells out your daily health narrative. And at this point, you may be thinking, oh my goodness, how do I start to get better sleep? What are your tips for good sleep? Well, beyond avoiding the damaging and harmful impact.
Now that's a good transition line too between saying, okay, here's the problem, right? The problem is that you're not getting enough sleep. And when you don't get enough sleep, here's all the different things that can be affecting all these negative health benefits. So now he's transitioning to the application, because remember, the audience is always asking themselves two questions: so what and now what? So what and now what? So whenever he starts talking about so what, here's all the stuff that's going to affect you, and then there's the now what. What do I do as a result of that? So this is where he's going to get into the application part.
Of alcohol and caffeine on sleep. And if you're struggling with sleep at night, avoiding naps during the day, I have two pieces of advice for you. The first is regularity. Go to bed at the same time, wake up at the same time, no matter whether it's the weekday or the weekend. Regularity is king, and it will anchor your sleep and improve the quantity and the quality of that sleep. The second is keep it cool. Your body needs to drop its core temperature by about 2 to 3 degrees Fahrenheit to initiate sleep and then to stay asleep. And it's the reason you will always find it easier to fall asleep in a room that's too cold than too hot. So aim for a bedroom temperature of around 65 degrees or about 18 degrees Celsius. That's going to be optimal for the sleep of most people. And then finally, in taking a step back, then, what is the mission-critical statement here? Well, I think it may be this. Sleep, unfortunately, is not an optional lifestyle luxury. Sleep is a non-negotiable biological necessity.
All right, there you go. Hope you enjoyed that speech breakdown from that TED Talk from Matt Walker. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to like the video and comment below. Let us know what is one takeaway that you learned that you're going to be applying to your next presentation or talk. All right, my friends, we'll catch you next time. You're awesome.